My name is Devin. I am a graduate researcher and currently finishing up my master's degree. So, my specialties in science and in chemistry. Have been a long time advocate and fascinated by psychedelics, and so over the years, I have watched all of the media content surrounding how psychedelics have now started to become marketed as medicines or as treatments for mental health disorders. And so my goal is to create kind of a page and create a resource for people to know what's going on in the psychedelic community, in science as a whole, and to give you guys some information about things you might not know are happening. So recently, the DEA is holding a court hearing, a trial that is supposed to be 10 days long, around scheduling two compounds, DOI and DOC. Is 4-iodo-2,5-dimethoxyamphetamine and 4-chloro-2,5-dimethoxyamphetamine, okay? These are two phenethylamines that are basically they're psychedelic or psychoactive compounds, and the DEA has been trying to schedule them since as far back as 2022 and probably farther than that. They have previously tried to schedule them in Schedule 1. Schedule 1, in the scheduling system of the United States, right? When you schedule Schedule 1, 2, or 3 compounds, these things get progressively worse in their restrictions and in their control as you get closer to Schedule 1. Okay? Schedule 1 means basically a high risk for abuse, no known medical benefit, and they are basically viewed by the DEA and other law enforcement agencies as hazards to public health, okay? This has never been proven at all for DOI or DOC. This is a massive problem, okay? So today, we're going to talk about this court hearing that is happening in Virginia, and we're going to be covering kind of what is being said and what is kind of my thoughts and review of how the DEA is addressing things, and the thoughts that they are showing and how the public should maybe be thinking about these, or how at least I think about them, okay? So this whole video is going to be released on YouTube, and clips of it are going to be spread on Instagram, TikTok, a variety of other platforms that you can find me at. And so from the video on YouTube, you guys will be able to see all of the links and the information that I want to attach to this video. So let's get started, okay? So the big thing that I want to start with is that all of this information is coming from a man named Hamilton Morris, okay? This is an absolutely crucial figure and a person that you all should know. You all should be well aware of his name, his YouTube channel, his Patreon, his shows. The content that he's put out has been absolutely groundbreaking and pivotal in all of the field of psychedelic research. You guys should be aware. And so if you're not, please go watch his videos before you watch this, okay? He is incredible and has been able to... He tells this story about how he was currently in Greece and he flew out to this DEA hearing in Virginia. He is there in person, and they are not allowing him to record in the courthouse or during the hearing. So he is handwriting notes of the questions that are being asked and the responses that are being given by the DEA's experts, their pharmacologists, their witnesses that they have been calling to the stand, okay? So we're going to be going over basically a summary of his summary. He is putting out daily dispatch videos on his Patreon. Highly recommend you go watch them yourselves, so that way you can kind of compare my reporting to his reporting and get a full picture of what's going on, okay? So he is putting out these daily videos. He calls them daily dispatches, okay? I kind of went through, took a lot of notes. Some of it is exactly what he's saying, so that way you guys can get a full picture. And some of it is my assessment of what he's talking about and kind of how I am thinking about this, and we'll go through it as we go. Tomorrow I will not be giving this long intro. I'll just kind of be getting into right away what I think, a continuation of day one, and we will be kind of looking at what happened, okay? Alright, so let's give you some background information about what happened. The first thing is these are not highly covered by media, alright? Hamilton and potentially one other person are the only people on day one that are parts of the media at all that are actually reporting on this, okay? And so the group that is in opposition of scheduling, okay, is SSDP. These are Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Great group. You should look into them and see the work that they're doing and their public outreach that they're trying to accomplish, okay? The DEA's pharmacologist is a woman named Teresa Carbonaro, okay? This is a very interesting person. I would love to communicate with her one day and try to get some interview. That's one thing that I'm also going to try to do as the page grows, is try to get more interviews and more conversations between me and experts, between me and other advocates and outreach, people on the opposing side, people who disagree. I would love for one day to have conversations with like DEA agents and people who have testified against these compounds to see where does that stance come from, okay? To continue, so I have a man named Brett James Phelps. He is the lawyer for SSDP, as well as Robert Rush. Okay, these are two incredible attorneys that are standing up on the side of SSDP, and you will hear some great questions and input from them along the way. The DEA judge overhearing this case is Paul E. Sofing, and the DEA attorney is Frank W. Mann. They have a few legal defense experts, scientists for SSDP, and one of them is Dr. Elaine Jaster. And so I'm going to look more into her work, as well as, so in the Daily Dispatch that Hamilton puts out, he mentions that he previously knew of Dr. Jaster via Mike Cunningham. From what I can find, Mike Cunningham he is tied largely to Psychedelic Science Review, things like Psychedelic Science Conference, PS 2023, things like that. I haven't gotten a chance to look deeply into their work and everything, so that's kind of what I will be touching on, hopefully in the next daily update that I'm going to provide to you guys. So the last thing that I want to cover for some background, and one thing that Hamilton points out throughout this, is that court hearings like this are theater, okay? These are a show that we're putting on in order to see who can swoon these DEA judges in order to try to get some semblance of care and responsibility taken from agencies like this that are making crucial decisions about what is and is not going to happen, and be allowed for not only scientific research but purely chemical freedom and people's ability to not only experiment with these things but research them and understand their effects and their effects on society, because right now they are currently restricted. And not only does that lead to further potential misuse of these, or basically criminalization of people who are trying to understand them for nonviolent offenses, things that are purely chemical and substances that happen to be out on the street. This is ridiculous, okay? Alright, let's get into this. I have 7 pages of notes that we're going to go over. I'm going to try to keep this under an hour, hour and a half. I have a pile of research that I'm supposed to be doing right now, and it is already almost 6:30 p.m. here, so let's get into it. The trial starts with a discussion about 151 comments that were sent to the DEA in opposition, and in some rare cases in support for the scheduling of these compounds. Basically, they talk about this back and forth, and they cover a lot of these comments. and it is made clear that from their experts and the attorneys that there's no strong evidence that any of these compounds have ever swayed a decision in a DEA hearing. Okay, I want you to understand that, because your comments are greatly appreciated and supported, but they may not make an impact, and so these things need to be done through legal representation. They need to be done through petitions. They need to be done through constant communication between your representatives, the DEA, various agencies, to make valid, legitimate claims about why these things matter. And hopefully, through that, through real effort, we can make a change. So, let's get into some of the questions that Brett Felt performed. So he basically said, have you ever encountered a DOI? So at this point, he's talking to the diversion investigator for the DEA. Okay, I have a definition. We'll go over that as we go along. But diversion is basically the acquiring of the chemical materials needed to make certain chemicals, getting in the hands of people who might abuse them. This is vague. I actually have the formal definition a little bit later on, and so we'll go into that. He asks, have you ever encountered DOI? And she responds with, no, I don't work with Schedule 1 substances. Okay, this, right off the bat, is not a good start, okay? DOI is not currently a Schedule 1 substance. That's why everybody is at this court hearing, okay? This initially leads off and shows the absolute unaware, composed nature of not only the DEA, but everybody involved. Nobody is understanding that these chemicals are not Schedule 1 and do not have this impact already. So this is followed up by kind of an explanation that the DEA currently already tried to schedule DOI and DOC and failed to do so due to administrative error. That's the statement. So I'm going to look into that a little bit more about what administrative error took place and why exactly that previous attempt was basically canceled and failed to accomplish the scheduling of these compounds. This then began a 5-hour cross-examination of Teresa Carbonaro. Dr. Carbonaro is the DEA's pharmacologist who previously studied under Dr. Roland Griffiths, who is an absolute pinnacle of psychedelic research and advocacy. You should look into Dr. Roland Griffiths. He has recently passed away. And so this is obviously tragic. They studied at Johns Hopkins University studying DXM and psilocybin. You should look into some of their research and their papers, very interesting. But it was also mentioned that Dr. Carbonaro is referred to as the DEA's go-to person on hallucinogens, okay? So you will see from her reporting and her testimony throughout, and you can make your own evaluation on the capability and the importance of having a sole go-to person on hallucinogens when discussing some of these very complicated and crucial decisions and scheduling decisions that are going to happen basically from here on out, and how these things are handled through the DEA. SSDP challenged the epidemiology qualifications of Dr. Carbonaro. Hamilton points out, and I have to agree, that I don't know if this is useful. Once we start getting into conversations about who is and who is not qualified to make these discussions against, especially when you're discussing this against the DEA's expert on these things, like, that is not being received by the DEA. That's not being received by the judge. And I quite frankly don't think getting into a discussion about these qualifications, like qualified people don't also make poor decisions, have poor judgment, make mistakes along the way. I don't know if that's useful. So we'll keep going. Carbonaro stumbled over the word epidemiology. We also run into an issue where the judge mispronounced hallucinogen 3 times. this is kind of what I'm concerned about, right? These people have the power to change hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people's lives in an instant, and they don't really even grasp these this context. They don't understand the compounds that they're addressing. They don't understand the classifications that they're going into, not with enough respect that they are confident in speaking about them, okay? So I have a note here that Hamilton's one of the only people with not only chemistry background, but synthetic background in the entire room. And they're having a conversation about the chemistry and the structure and the classifications of compounds that none of these people understand, okay? Alright, Carbonaro then discusses and mispronounces DOI and DOC's names. Hamilton also provides a story about Ritalin and the journey that he took from the Dominican Republic on his way to Greece and then to the DEA headquarters, and I highly recommend that you go and watch the actual Patreon. I'm going to go very little into his experience and his story and over the last few days for him. I'm going to leave that to him. I purely want to kind of go over interesting facts about the case, things I'm concerned about, and I might touch on stuff here and there. I highly recommend that you go and watch that. So, Dr. Carbonaro then discusses the adverse effects of DOI and DOC and brings up cardiovascular concerns, paranoia, violent outbursts. None of this is backed up by evidence. There's no evidence provided to justify any of these claims, to describe a specific incident where there was a violent outburst. This is just blanketly stated and just provided to the court. There's then some discussion about the UN 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances, and basically this convention is aimed to limit diversion and abuse of a variety of psychoactive substances and to mitigate public harm. And so then I have here that I'll so basically then I will be posting a link to more information about the UN convention in the YouTube video. That way you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. There's further discussion about the whether the UN Controlled Substances Act and the UN Convention and the U.S. Controlled Substances Act should be aligned with one another. And basically the DEA does not agree that these documents have to align at all. They don't believe that if the UN Convention states that a compound is controlled or should be restricted, that the DEA then has to do so, or that they can restrict a compound without the UN declaring it as a controlled substance. So this is the first kind of split showing that these things may not be aligned and that the DEA can make its own decisions about what things should and should not be restricted. This is where things take an odd turn, okay? Most of the rest of the day begins to touch on Reddit, okay? The DEA is on Reddit. They are looking. They are reading posts, and they are making decisions and scheduling conclusions off of posts and opinions and statements that are provided on Reddit, okay? I don't know where to go from here on this topic. This is concerning because these are anonymous websites with very little verification done, research into who's making these posts, and sweeping decisions are being made off of them, okay? Hamilton discusses how this can lead to people having pseudo-secretive conversations and trying to avoid responsibility on things like Reddit with acronyms like SWIM, like somebody who isn't me, or like, oh, my dog ate this and now he had this reaction. This is terrible, right? This is terrible. People should not have to censor themselves in open discussion forums where they are trying to describe the effects of a drug or the occurrence or the events, or quite frankly, say nonsense about whether or not they did or did not do these things. One of the things I also want to touch on that he mentions is very few of these people have ever had any of their drugs analytically verified, right? Nobody actually knows what they're taking. People know what they said that they were giving you when they bought them. People kind of know what things feel like or don't. People might take a broad sweeping drug test kit that tests for classes of compounds like an amphetamine, but very few people actually know truly what they took. Okay, so since the DEA is discussing Reddit like this, right, they are using people's reports to decide what is going to be made illegal. Okay, so they discussed this one post about a DOI party and the use of it to treat like an ailment, I believe like arthritis they mentioned, and this is being submitted as evidence of abuse and use in general, and that is being offered to discuss making a conclusion about whether or not these substances should be made illegal. They start then on a multi-hour discussion about the prongs of analysis on whether or not a compound should be controlled and how they make that decision. They asked Dr. Carbonaro if she was able to find any evidence of diversion, and she was not. I have the kind of the more specific definition of diversion here as the act of getting controlled substances or the chemicals to make these substances in the hands of people who may abuse them. This is the DEA's way of preventing diversion and preventing people who may abuse chemicals from getting access to these chemicals or the ability to make these chemicals. Okay. They then discuss drug discrimination studies as a way to determine a chemical's abuse potential, and essentially these are ways of taking trained rodents and forcing chemicals with them with a reinforcer like treats or etc. These rodents then tap a lever if maybe two drugs are similar or create similar reactions in them, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. This is things like, right, MDMA is considered a drug of abuse by the DEA, and this or that could be mistaken by a rodent, and it could tap the lever saying, hey, this is similar to MDMA, and that could be used as proof that this chemical might undergo a similar profile and be at a risk for abuse. Okay, this is a ridiculous way to approach highly important studies about the abuse potential when you're discussing drug discrimination versus things like preference. Is this mouse going over to that chemical over another thing? Is there self-administration where it is choosing to go and take these, or are you giving it to this rodent that has already been trained to tap a lever and it is undergoing some uncomfort with a different thing and it just knows to tap that lever? This is not a definitive way, and almost never is drug discrimination used today as a measure of abuse potential and a way to study abuse potential. This is not how modern studies use this. And we'll go over that kind of, I think in day 2 and day 3, we discuss this a little bit more and discuss kind of what is used, and we'll go into that, but I'm going to kind of hold off on that. I'm going to make you guys kind of wait, so we'll see. Then there is evidence that DOI should be controlled. So then after discussing these drug discrimination studies, they start talking about what evidence there is that DOI should be controlled in Schedule 1, and they start talking about how in drug discrimination studies it has substituted in the past for DOM. Okay? I would love to see in the comments or anywhere, has anybody heard of anybody taking DOM? Do you know of anybody with a problem with DOM that has frequently taken and or taken at all DOM? DOM is another one of these compounds, right, with a methyl group there instead of an iodine or a chlorine. We will read it off for those who really want to be able to go look up the structure themselves. We will do that right now. You could say 4-methyl, or you could say 2,5-dimethoxy-4-methylamphetamine, right? Or 4-methyl-2,5-dimethoxyamphetamine. This compound is described by Hamilton as an anti-target for psychedelics. This is uncomfortable. Most people don't enjoy DOM, at least not significantly enough to be addicted to it. Almost nobody has ever taken DOM, much less has repeatedly taken DOM. I know plenty of people who have experimented with tons of these kinds of psychedelics, and not a single one of them has ever reported taking DOM, and I don't know anybody who has abused it in any way. So this is bad science. This is a bad example of abuse potential, and they are using it as a way to make a case that DOI and DOC should be controlled because it mimics this during drug discrimination studies. This is ridiculous. Okay, so both DOI and DOM produce similar wet dog shakes. They cover, which I believe to be the HTR, the head twitch response. So this is basically as rodents take certain chemicals, they'll kind of twitch their head and they'll shake their ears. This is similar to how dogs like shake off water off of their body. And so now this has kind of become like a standard as people getting like wet dog shakes under a chemical, or the head twitch response in rodents. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. They continue on some more mice studies. Very little human use is offered. And then they kind of try to frame this through the comparison to LSD. And then Hamilton really goes into a great point that LSD and MDMA and psilocybin are some of the most used psychedelics across the world, especially in the US, and nobody would make the argument that they're public health issues. Like how many LSD hospitalizations are recorded each year, and that they're not even a blip on the... He has this really great way of saying it, that they're on the radar of psychoactive substance-associated human suffering. Okay, let me... hospitalizations. We're going to look this up. We'll do this right here. I'm going to try to find... If anybody actually has better numbers and wants to visit this in the comments, please do. Of course, it's behind Wiley's paywall. That is another thing we'll cover in later videos about the paywalls being used in scientific research and what that does when people are trying to do a variety of reporting, and what that does to normal civilians who are trying to do this, right? So I'm getting varying numbers, and they're often lumped into, what did they say right here? Trends in hallucinogen associated emergency department visits or something. Yeah, visits and hospitalizations in California, U.S. From 2016 to 22. I'm getting a variety of numbers. something to the effect of maybe several thousand, but there's no review on how many this is, or there's no consensus on how many or what these things come from or what compounds they're looking for. And this is super vague. So if we're talking specifically about LSD and MDMA, I would be fascinated to see how many overdoses actually take place each year, and what that number is comparatively to 300 million people, right? So let's continue. Dr. Carbonaro asked if Shulgin made DOI and DOC. She did not know. The answer is no, he did not. These were actually Canadian chemists shortly after he created DOM. Carbonaro said that mentions that there are no antagonists for DOI and DOC. This is odd. There are 2 FDA-approved 5-HT2A antagonists, Ketanserin and Pimavanserin, I believe they are pronounced. Look them up. They are FDA approved. They're out there. They are there. So I'm sure she knew about those. So I don't really know why she said that or why that's relevant. Then the DEA's attorney mispronounced phenethylamine as phenylethylamide. There's not a lot of chemical literacy in this courtroom, and they don't know why any of that would matter if you're saying a completely different compound. But we'll continue. They went on to more conversation about Reddit and posts about DOI for arthritis to somebody's mother that was given without knowledge. Again, are we supposed to take that as a valid proof that somebody actually did that, or is that somebody just speaking about random things, or some chemical that they bought that they thought was DOI that they gave to their mom? Did they actually give it to their mom? There's no backup to this. There's no investigation done on this post. This is just offered as a statement. Then Carbonaro goes into the fact that people dissolve DOI in saline solution and impregnate it on paper, and that no legitimate drug comes on paper. I don't know if they actually dissolve it in saline. I'm sure things could be impregnated on paper. Why that matters, I'm not sure. And I believe that there's things like ondansetron. Wow, hold on. I'm going to butcher that. I was right. Ondansetron, right? This often comes on strips, okay? I don't know. Maybe it's not paper. I don't know why that's relevant at all. I guess no legitimate drugs come on paper, but it's like the delivery system in some way proving that something may or may not be illicit. I mean, other drugs can be dissolved and impregnated on paper, right? So I don't really know why that matters. Basically, then she goes on, this is hilarious. So then there's a conversation about how DOI is encountered as a powder and therefore it suggests illicit use. This is funny because we'll go into how they end up having a conversation about how the powderiness of a substance could imply more illicit or illegal or illegitimate use, and whether or not that plays a role in the decision. There's a discussion about rhabdomyolysis, and whether or not there was a report of a man who had passed away holding a copy of basically a psychedelic book, and it's believed that this is a DOC overdose. Again, I don't know whether or not that's relevant. Because you can overdose on something, is the expectation that no drug and no chemical should ever be able to be overdosed on? I doubt that. I don't know how we could ever make that argument. I mean, you could take too much of anything. You could overdose on a variety of medications that are given over the counter. People overdose on pain medication almost every day, if not by the thousands. There are plenty of chemicals all around the world that are taken that are known to cause cancer or cause kidney failure or a variety of other things, and they're given out without regard. So there's, at the end of the day, the main thing that matters is the cost benefit or the risk and reward kind of analysis that should be had. And when we're talking about that, like Hamilton puts a great example of this, right? Cost benefit of things like fluoroalkanes and air duster. People use air duster. It works. It dislodges particles in keyboards and electronics. Are people maybe abusing these things? Sure. What is that number compared to the usefulness of the compounds? How many things are we going to continue to restrict over and over and over again because they may or may not have abuse potential for somebody doing something that is against the labeled recommended use? I mean, we know that these things work. They're successful at their job, and we've done the cost-benefit analysis and realized they have a greater benefit than the potential public cost that comes with them when it is exceedingly low comparatively to the amount of use that these things are commonly done and portrayed in, right? Like, this is not a common enough thing to be a problem. And so the fact that that is even a discussion should be interesting to everybody. I just saw somebody come into the chat. I think it says that I have another viewer. It's great to see you. I appreciate you stopping by. I have you open over here on another monitor, so if you want to pop in the chat and respond to anything I'm saying, I definitely want to hear from you. Basically, we're going over the notes that Hamilton Morris provided from day one of the DEA's trial to schedule 2 chemicals, DOI and DOC, as Schedule 1 substances. And I'd love to hear from you. Okay, let's continue, alright? The other thing that I want to go over, right, is how common these chemicals are in scientific research, right? They are super important when we're talking about studying the 5-HT2A receptor, when we're trying to understand how all these serotonin processes work. DOI is an incredibly specific 5-HT2A agonist, and it is site-specific. It is very potent. It's these things that we would like from a chemical that we're going to use in scientific research, right? It is also used abundantly. It is not a Schedule 1 substance as it sits right now until this court hearing is over. It is currently in over 2,600 scientific publications with the word DOI and over 10,000 experiments with DOI. This is not even including DOC, right? We're talking about 10,000 experiments have been run with this compound. There's over 800 patents using DOI, and as we discussed already, there's basically zero impact, while the scientific benefit is huge. People are studying these compounds. Let's keep going. I can't quite see who's in here, but I appreciate it. These videos will also be uploaded, clipped, and kind of torn apart for YouTube channels and Instagram and TikTok. I'll try to post all that in the comments later on, but we'll get there. So Dr. Carbonaro then discusses psychic or physical dependence liability and says that most people only take these substances once. I think that this inherently shows that these compounds are not a dependence liability. People are not taking these compounds frequently, right? They are not sitting here, and it doesn't show a bunch of risk for abuse if people are often taking these substances one time. This is also kind of suggesting that any abuse is suggesting any use is suggesting abuse. We'll talk about that more later on, because it shows a really interesting example of how the DEA looks at these substances. It's very concerning, and so we'll go into that. She's then asked, would prohibition of DOI and DOC impact scientific work? And she says that she did not believe that it would. She states that she regulates Schedule I licenses for the DEA and thought that it would be a non-issue for people to get these licenses. Plenty of people have worked in labs trying to work with Schedule I licenses, okay? It is a huge pain. Often takes a year. If you have Schedule I licenses, there's a variety of checklist points that you have to work these compounds, right? You have to have a safe where all these compounds are in. You have to keep rigorous inventory. You have to report back and forth with the DEA and with the EPA. You have to send these substances back when you're done using them. This is a massive problem, and it could set back research years. Not to mention all of the hoops that you have to jump through that can inhibit the actual work as you go along, right? They go to I believe they go to lunch, and Hamilton overhears the DEA saying that he failed chemistry. There's a lot of these asides. I highly recommend you go and check out the Patreon to kind of hear all of the asides and statements that the DEA says, either under their breath or at lunch or when they think nobody's listening, right? The expert is now on, so Dr. Jaster starts to point out many of the inaccuracies in the government's case, and Hamilton mentions how this wasn't really effective. It might ruin a little bit of your theater act that you're trying to put on for the judge, right? The DEA gave the wrong CAS number or CAS number for DOI and DOI hydrochloride. Nobody cares, right? Anybody who doesn't know what these numbers are don't care. We'll see if they give an actual definition, so I can provide that for you. These are chemical abstract service registry numbers, right? So these are unique numbers that are provided to a specific chemical, and it's different whether or not it's a free-based version or a hydrochloride salt or any other version of this chemical is completely different and has its own unique registry number. And you can look up chemicals by their CAS number. You can look this up and you can see one compound versus another versus a salt of it, and this is how people identify a very specific thing that they're talking about, and they are providing incorrect CAS numbers to this entire process. This is a problem for anybody who cares about the chemistry and the compounds they're talking about. It just shows how loose they are being with the compounds, and to me this is a huge problem. To me, I find this to be disturbing that we are talking about regulating these compounds, and does it matter maybe pharmacologically? I don't know. I'm sure that it does, from whether or not you're talking about the free-based form or the salt of that compound. But at the end of the day, like, let's be clear. We're in an official court hearing. Let's know and have our ducks in order and in a row of what is happening, right? What are we even talking about? So, this goes back to pointing out inaccuracies like that. They don't care, right? They don't care. So, how do we... Hamilton says a good statement. How do we engage their emotions? And that's a great point. How do we communicate to the DEA, to federal agencies, to the government, the importance of these things, and go, hey, these can make a noticeable impact, not only in scientific research, but in people, but in personal liberty? How do you make a case that panders to them as a human and as a person that these things are important? How do you make that case, and what things do you point out? What things do you press? How do you make them realize, hey, your case isn't strong enough, your opinion isn't valid in this given circumstance, okay? We're at about probably 45 minutes. I still have quite a bit to go, but I'll try to get through the rest of this. So like I said, we can keep it to an hour. I'm sure I'm going too fast for some and too slow for others. Um, so after they take lunch, the SSDP lawyer is still speaking with Dr. Carbonaro and says, "Has your definition of abuse changed after your employment with the DEA?" These start to get really interesting. She replies, "No, it hasn't." He then asks a question that I think is powerful, but I think that he also kind of makes a jaded remark towards her that I don't know if the judge maybe liked or not. But he mentions, would her definition be the same as her late mentor, Roland Griffiths? She replies that she was not sure. I think this is very fascinating because she worked with Roland Griffiths, who is a incredible advocate and psychedelic researcher. And so would he have found abuse, the definition and the scope of what is and is not abuse, as narrow or quite frankly as broad as she does, where any use or any encounter with these compounds could be evidence that somebody is abusing these compounds? I don't think he would. I think that he would have made a better argument towards the fact that people can safely use and encounter these chemicals without declaring that they're abusing them. The lawyer then says, "Where does one purchase DOI or DOC?" And she couldn't answer. And then he asks, "Are there any websites that sell DOI or DOC?" And she kind of vaguely mentions the dark web. What does that even mean? Are there potential people on the dark web through what? The dark web is a vague, open statement that there are specific channels within the veil of the dark web through Onion or Tor browsers or something along those lines that people could be selling research chemicals. Sure, but DOI is not a Schedule 1 substance right now. I am sure that there are some legitimate reagent company from somewhere that is selling DOI. And so I don't know of any, and I've never encountered any of these compounds, DOI, DOC, DOM, but I'm sure that since they are unrestricted, that there's somebody who would make them. I would be shocked that the DEA isn't aware of anywhere that these compounds are available. That's interesting. He then presses, through the years, how many times has DOI or DOC been encountered by law enforcement? And he breaks this down year to year, which I find really fascinating and shows a great point of whether or not these compounds are common, they're encountered by law enforcement, how detrimental or crucial or common these things are. So he starts saying, how many times, and he lists them year by year. He says 2005, once, 2008, twice, 2010, once, 2013, once, 2015, twice, 2016, 0, 2017, once, 2018, once, 2019, 0, 2020, 0, 2021, 0, 2023, 0. I don't know how else to frame it. At this point, right? At this point, when I'm listening to Hamilton's episode, this to me drives home as much of the point as you possibly can. These are completely insignificant. These are not used, not found, not frequent. I mean, we're talking about all over the country, right? These are not one area. These are not... Are they encountered by law enforcement? Are they encountered by the DEA? How many cases? What is happening? I think, what did we say? The most was twice in the last 15 years? I mean, this is disturbing, right? It's disturbing to me that we're having this conversation about chemicals that have shown up 10 times when there are chemicals that are showing up thousands of times a day. I mean, what are we doing, right? So Carbonaro then follows us up with probably the most shocking statement that she's made the entire court hearing. Again, like Hamilton, I'm not trying to trash Dr. Carbonaro at all. I want to speak with her. I'm curious about how she and the rest of the DEA have come to these conclusions knowing these numbers. She follows us up with, even though these numbers are small, after they are controlled, these numbers would increase. Okay. Even though these numbers are small, after they're controlled, they would increase. So does that mean, what does that mean? Does that mean that once they're controlled, their use and they're encountering, DEA and law enforcement encountering these substances would increase, so people are going to use them more? When they're busting chemicals, they're still analyzing the chemicals that they're finding, right? So they still know that DOI is it. It's not a controlled substance, so they know it's not a drug that they're looking for, but they know it's there. So this could only mean that the use is going to go up. So this completely goes against the concept of controlling and scheduling drugs as a whole. If you're going to control them, and it's going to increase use, increase numbers. Sorry, let me finish this point. Thank you so much for popping in here. If this is going to increase usage, does that not go completely against the stated purpose of scheduling and controlling these drugs, right? So I found this statement really interesting. I'm going to respond to our chat right here, and I'm probably just say it. It says, are you pro-drug or pro-non-drug? It says, I'm a drug addict. Very interesting. So I think that's very interesting. I'd be fascinated to hear more. I don't know if you're willing to share any more here in the public chat, you know what I mean? But I am pro-drug, right? I am pro-chemical freedom. I think I want to be very clear about this. I am not open to the concept that we can control away or prohibit and restrict people's use to chemicals, and that in some way is going to prevent people from abusing chemicals that they are already abusing. I think that has never worked. I think that the only way to help anybody who is, whether they are currently addicted to a chemical or interested in trying a chemical, is that there are free, safe ways for people to get pure versions of chemicals, so that way they are not encountering adulterants, they know what they are taking, they feel safe in doing these things, they don't feel shamed and abused by the system as a whole when they're doing non-violent acts on their own body. I think that these things are fine, At the store, there'd be no reason for me to stop. So I think that that's an interesting. I don't know if that pops up on stream. I don't think it does. It says, if drugs were legal and I could get them at the store, there would be no reason for me to stop. This is a very interesting point, okay? I think that if they were legal and they were at stores, I think that the distribution of them would be interesting, right? I don't know if people will, especially in the next many, many years, would be able to get them free, not free, but unassisted, right? So there are certain ones where education would come with any chemical that you're getting. I think education's important. I think that if people are addicted to certain drugs, there should be education surrounding the harm and the benefit. So earlier I mentioned a thing called the cost-benefit analysis. Whether or not the cost and the detriment that might come from abusing a chemical outweighs the benefit and the use of that chemical. I think that if you were able to get them at a store, the hope would be that there are better options depending on what drug you're abusing. I'm not sure what you are currently addicted to, but I would hope that there are better options for keeping you healthy, allowing you to do that in a safe way, that these things are not dirty and that they're not contaminated. People, when they are doing alcohol, for example, right? Method opiate pills, right? So one of the people in the comments mentioned that they are currently addicted to meth and opiates, right? These things are challenging, and they're currently viewed at negatively in society, right? There are plenty of examples where they have used either meth in the past or opiates in the past for beneficial purposes. Meth has been used in the past previously, and we have found better ones that have less we have better neuroprotective analogs of methamphetamine that are more beneficial for the human, and they are used widely for a variety of ADHD, for a variety of stimulants, and for a variety of, there are high altitude medications that use basically neurostimulants that function on the same pathway. Opiates have been used as pain medications forever. So I think that if things have become detrimental to your work, to your human, to your health, to your relationships, to your friendships, to your life, where you are not enjoying the use of them recreationally, and they are impacting your life, and you are unhappy with how that's affecting you, then I think that there should be other routes for you to be able to take. I would hope that there are other ways for you to reach out and for you to get out of them. If you enjoy doing these things, then there are ways to mitigate them to where they are not impacting your social relationships, right? This is where you should be allowed to do chemicals. You should be allowed to indulge in yourself and in chemicals as a human and as an adult. That should be a thing that is available. There's a great example of this. I'm not sure if you're still in here, but there's a great example of this with, what's his name? I believe he's a professor at Cornell. Let's see. I can't remember his name right now. I've just spoke about this a little bit earlier. I have to go through a million routes, right? Professor Carl Hart, right? Professor Carl Hart spoke in a really controversial, kind of brave way about how him and his wife, believe it was just him, so I'll keep it to him, but I believe he stated publicly that him and his wife choose to do it together, that they take pure heroin, right? This kind of took the world by storm because people were like, how can you be a professor? How can you do these things? And yet he does them, right? Yet he chooses to take pure versions of heroin after he has completed all of his other responsibilities, and he chooses to do that. I think that my view and current stance is that I hope that everybody is able to fulfill their life and their daily responsibilities, and they are able to function and be happy with themselves in society and integrate with their friends and their family and their cohorts and interact with life in a way that is positive. I think that right now, I think that my version of when you start to abuse things is when you start to interrupt those aspects of your life, right? That is where you run into challenges, and you could begin to realize that your relationship with a given chemical is no longer healthy, okay? I think that would be my concern. So I think that we've lost that viewer, but I hope that he goes back and watches this stream and the rest of this conversation, and I hope that anybody else who has any of these concerns will go into the comments and we can have a discussion about whether or not these things play a role in medicine or in society, whether or not people who are suffering choose to do these chemicals or not, and what that would look like for helping those people. I am of the opinion that there are better chemicals than the ones that are of a high risk for abuse, like psychedelics, that have not demonstrated a high risk for abuse, a high addiction or habit forming potential, and they have a extremely low toxicity and health risk profile. So the ability for you to overdose on them, or the risk for that, is extremely low. The ability for you to undergo other neurological damage is extremely low. I think that in the correct dosage, under the right circumstances, you can take most things safely. You have to then grasp your relationship with these chemicals, right? Alright. I think that I well covered that. Let's continue on. I think I have a few more pages. Let's crank these out. We're at over an hour right now. I appreciate our person here, our viewer who popped in and made an account to discuss these things. I appreciate that. Okay. So we left off on where Dr. Carbonaro mentions that these things are, that the cases of these and the the interactions between law enforcement finding these would increase, right? So then she follows it up with, her response was that it would be looked for more carefully by chemists. I don't know if this is correct. This is what I mentioned earlier. Like, would they then start realizing that that chemical that they found at this place happened to be a drug of abuse? Like, it is now because it's declared as Schedule 1, but it was never found, right? I mean, these things were encountered by law enforcement, was the question. They weren't found. They weren't encountered. They didn't find them, right? So, they then go into a conversation discussing the validity of Reddit, Arrowhead, PCOL, these other sources of use and interactions with these chemicals. Nobody knows, right, the validity of some of these stories or some of these interactions. PCOL was written by Alexander Shulgin, who personally tested a variety of psychoactive substances, and his reporting seems to be more clear than others, but that is a story of him and his close group that did so. Nobody truly knows who all of these people are, or what they said is how they felt. This is purely his reporting from anecdotal evidence. This is not at all representative of global or national consumption of a chemical, and that needs to be abundantly clear as well. So then they go into the semantics of the term new, and whether or not DOI is new, and whether or not this is the term new is a temporal phenomenon. I don't think I'm going to go into this very much. I think this is just wheel turning. I don't think this is really effective. And so then the question's asked, has DOI or DAC been prosecuted under the Analog Act? And Dr. Carbonaro mentions that she's not aware of any evidence that it has been, right? Dr. Brett Phelps then asks, is drug substitution where a drug is forced on a rodent and then they get a reward? I thought this was pretty funny. Carbonaro responds that they get a reinforcer, yes. He asked, do they use it on their own volition? She says, no, they do not. He says, is drug discrimination a valid measure of abuse? And she responds with, yes, because it is used that way. I don't really know what that means, aside from they use it to measure abuse, but that's not really the question, right? Is it a valid way of measuring abuse? And it doesn't, quite frankly, seem to be. But I guess that's another issue. that we could talk about at a different time. He then asked, why is self-administration not used as a measure of abuse potential? So does this rodent choose to take this and continue taking it? She responds, drugs that work via the 5-HT2A receptor do not cause self-administration. I think this is another telling piece where does that not alone signify that these things are not at a high risk for abuse? That question is asked, is this evidence of no abuse potential? And she responds with, under the DEA's definition of self-administration, under the DEA's definition of abuse, self-administration is not required. I find this really interesting, so people don't have to choose and repeatedly choose to take a chemical for it to be considered abuse, right? The conversation then turned to analytical chemistry and how they measure and how they characterize these chemicals and how they characterize whether or not what is happening in abuse. But to basically every question she responds, I'm not a chemist, which she isn't, right? She's a pharmacologist, and so she doesn't fully understand how these things are being measured and tracked and what is being reported. Then basically the question is asked, is a substance being a powder more dangerous? To which she responds, finding a substance as a powder is evidence that it is intended for illicit use. This goes on, which I'll talk about, and I'll give you guys what was reported. Basically, the SSDP counters that capsules contain powder, and she essentially responds with, that doesn't count because it's in a capsule. So, does the powderiness contribute to the FDA approval? I find this argument really interesting and kind of redundant because, okay, so if I put a powdery substance in a capsule, does that mean that it is not now intended for illicit use once I take capsuled medications and take them out and there is a bag of powder that used to be in a capsule of a legitimate medication, it is now going to be abused by somebody else? I don't know. I don't know if this does anything for the whole conversation, but we can cover that kind of as it goes along. Basically, that Hamilton makes a great point here where he says the only importance is that these things cause essentially no harm to the public and are a huge benefit for science, right? The question is asked, have any of these seizures taken place at universities? She responds with no. And seizures only occur if a substance is illegal, which this doesn't matter because DOI and DOC are not illegal. And that's why everybody's having this court hearing, right? This is ridiculous. I mean, we're getting into weird water where these people have no education about these compounds, and they are making decisions that could change history. They can change people's careers, their lives, their future education, people's education on these compounds. They can change everything. And they're having conversations like whether or not this thing was seized, and no, because they would have to be illegal, but DOI and DOC aren't illegal. And I don't know. I don't know what to make of any of this. It was really disturbing hearing all of this because these substances shouldn't be illegal, right? They shouldn't be. And I don't know what to make of it. We're almost done. I think we have a page or two left. We're at about an hour 10, which is right around where I thought we'd be. The SSDP lawyer then presses Dr. Carbonaro about where can DOI be purchased. She responds with, I don't feel comfortable telling the court where to purchase illicit substances. Again, DOI is not illegal or illicit. It is not currently scheduled. This is not an illegal compound. She could tell people where to get it. And then she is pressed on whether or not the number of encounters is indicative of use of a compound, to which she responds with yes. Okay, she just said that the number of encounters is comparative to the use of this chemical. Okay? If I find more of it, there's more people using it. If it is encountered more by law enforcement, then it is being used more. Okay? The next question is, would controlling a substance increase the number of law enforcement encounters? Yes. So, by your own words, scheduling would increase usage. She backpedals. I did not say that encounters were a proxy for use. Let me back up. Is the number of encounters indicative of use of a compound? Yes. I don't know how we make progress here, right? I don't know how we are trying to make an argument that these things are not currently tied, that one is not a proxy for another, that scheduling these things doesn't increase usage, doesn't increase encounters, but it does increase encounters, that's not indicative of use. I mean, we're circling here. And she says that she did not say that. Everybody heard her say it. It's in everybody's notes. She did say that. There's then a discussion about FDA-approved cocaine and whether or not it comes as a powder, to which she responds that FDA cocaine is not a powder. There are certain conditions in which prescriptions for FDA-approved formulations of cocaine can be administered. I am not aware of what that entails. There's then a rehashing about how our laws do not have to be congruent with the UN convention, essentially. And the U.S. Controlled Substances Act does not have to match the UN conventions. Okay? They briefly go over the legal bureaucracy of getting a Schedule I license, to which Dr. Carbonaro reveals that she has never actually applied for one. When she worked in the lab with Dr. Roland Griffiths, he already had a Schedule I license, so she does not know what that actually entails from the side of the researcher, and only from her end where she reviews the applications to getting these Schedule I licenses. This point is really interesting. So as you'll see in day 2 and 3, there is more discussion about how the judge allowed for discussion of research harm. This is not traditionally allowed or discussed, that scheduling these compounds would impact current researchers and whether or not they can access it, who is doing stuff right now, is that become illegal. They asked how would active research be affected if the scheduling were to take place. And the answer is that the legality is at the discretion of the DEA field office at the time of scheduling. So it's scheduled, and then the local field office is then able to make it's at their discretion on whether or not these compounds become illegal for people who are currently doing that research. I don't know how anybody's able to stay current and follow the laws if that's the case, right? They asked, would research need to be halted if DOI and DOC were scheduled? And the answer is it would be up to the diversion investigator of that field office. So I'll keep going through some of these. They also did not know if unlicensed researchers would be breaking the law, working with what would be then become a scheduled substance, right? Yes, they would be scheduled, and they would have to go about getting those licenses. But they are currently doing that research. They're currently in the possession of these compounds. What is the process that they need to go through? Do they need to halt research? That's unclear. They have to go through the local field office's diversion investigator. Are they currently breaking the law? Are they currently criminals now, overnight, at the date of scheduling? The DEA is being asked this, and they don't know the answer. So how are researchers who most aren't even aware that this court case is happening, how are they supposed to be aware if they're breaking the law or not? It's not clear. That's not clear right now. Okay. We are almost done. And then, basically, Dr. Carbonaro has asked these last few questions. Are you aware of any potential medical importance of these compounds of DOI or DOC? To which she responds, yes, but many labs working on preclinical work have already have a Schedule 1 license. This is irrelevant because they don't have a Schedule 1 license for DOI and DOC because they're not currently Schedule 1 substances, so I don't know why that matters. Is there medical importance or not? Which inherently breaks Schedule 1 classification of these compounds. Schedule 1 dictates that there is no currently accepted medical benefit of the compound at all. But yes, she has heard that there are potential medical importance benefits to these compounds. People are doing preclinical work on them. They're currently not scheduled. If they were not to be scheduled, they would be introduced and potentially make it to clinical trials in which they exhibit potential benefits and medical importance. This should stand alone as a situation that we have to be able to discuss whether or not we are going to schedule substances that have not even undergone clinical work. They have not undergone any testing to see if there is a medical benefit. Nobody is aware of whether or not there is potential use and benefit to having these compounds in society, and we are going to schedule them as Schedule 1, completely regulated and behind a massive wall of DEA regulations to even research them, to know if they are at risk for abuse, at risk for any harm to the public, whether or not they are beneficial to medicine, to science, to public health. They could be a massive benefit. Nobody's able to know that yet. This is a huge problem. This is the final thing that I want to touch on. They are then asked, do you consider two things? She then states that the DEA does not need to establish physical dependence, only psychological dependency. But which the SSDP lawyers respond, didn't you say that most people only take these substances once? Her answer is, I don't remember saying that. Everybody remembers her saying that. It's in the notes as well as earlier. So everybody remembers her saying that. And the next part is crucial. This is something I want to touch on, that I really hope that everybody hears. This is something that I find disturbing. The DEA's go-to person on hallucinogens, the DEA's pharmacologist, is asked, do you consider any use abuse? Okay? To which there's an uproar in the courtroom. All of the DEA agents begin laughing. Okay? They begin laughing, and some even loud enough to interrupt the court proceeding, shouting, yes. I mean, of course, right? Any use of these substances is abuse. This sent chills down my spine. This is the disconnect. This is the problem. This is where communication between researchers and advocates and people who vehemently disagree and despise these chemicals and the use of these chemicals and promote the scheduling and regulation of drugs as a whole, the conversation begins to break down, where they feel that any use is abuse. This just can't be the case. There's plenty of examples. There's plenty of what they would consider legitimate drugs that people use every day, and they don't abuse, right? They don't create a problem in their lives. They don't disrupt their social environment. They don't disrupt their health. They are not abusing these chemicals. They are enjoying these chemicals, experimenting with these chemicals, testing them in scientific purposes, using them in studies, using them. And the DEA has made a stance that any use is abuse. I hope you all take care. I will be posting the day 2 summary as soon as I possibly can. You can see bits of this, you can see clips from this on my Instagram, on my TikTok, on my YouTube. All of those links will be provided, and I hope you all stay healthy. I hope you stay well. I hope you stay out of the way. I hope that you handle yourselves accordingly. I hope that you keep in mind that your statements and your opinions and your recounting of events and usage on Reddit and on Arrowhead and on other social media platforms are being seen by the DEA. They do see them. They are using them to make decisions about your freedoms. They are able to make sweeping conversations about whether or not you are able to use, study, understand different compounds around the world. I love you all, and I will continue making these and posting a variety of content everywhere. And I will see you soon enough.